Today we're going to talk about the power of operating out of a bucket overflowing. We all saw that physics experiment where you have a sequence of buckets and they're all interlined at different levels. And one at the top was filled with water, and the water pours into the next, fills the next, fills the next, fills the next, and it keeps this constant cycle. This cycle of constant overflow continues all the way through, and it brings this calming and soothing effect to the room. From the sounds that you hear, it just brings that tranquility to the room. That's what we're going to talk about today. Learning the power of operating out of a bucket overflowing. Your life should always be like a bucket overflowing. Every single thing you do should be like a bucket overflowing. If you're going to teach somebody how to do something, you need to be learning it yourself and then teaching out of that overflow. And as you teach out of that overflow, you're building yourself and you're building the other person as well. And in the process, you're not causing yourself to feel burnt out. What happened, you're energizing yourself, you're energizing them as well. You're learning yourself and they're learning as well. And that's how the cycle needs to be. I want to talk about IQ and EQ. IQ, I would not go that much into, which is your intelligent quotient, and that's just a typical test that you could take to see how smart you are intelligently. But today, really what I want to talk about is your EQ, your emotional quotient. And your emotional quotient is how stable you are emotionally. Yes, how well you put together, how well you could cope with situations, how well you could cope with stresses, how well you could deal with tough times, how well you could go through tough situations. That's your emotional quotient. And in order to operate out of a bucket that's overflowing, your emotional quotient has to be very high. You have to have a high emotional quotient. How do you get a high emotional quotient, you might ask? You have to deal with you. It's almost like taking an onion and you're cutting the onion into half and you're peeling it apart and you're finding out the portions of it that is bad and you're removing it. That's exactly how you deal with your increasing your emotional quotient. That means you have to deal with you. You have to deal with bitterness. Things that messed you up in terms of the words that were spoken over you, or in terms of emotional issues that you have. You know, you deal with them. If you have to forgive someone, you forgive them. Because in order to walk in wholeness, you have to get rid of all of that excess baggage. So you forgive. You forgive and you get rid of bitterness and unforgiveness. Another thing that you have to do is that you have to deal with your insecurities. Yes, you have to deal with your insecurities. If you're not good at school, then you have to start reading. You have to start learning. You have to start looking at things educational, and you have to start building your mind so then you become good in that area. If you're not good in terms of being a parent, in terms of communicating with your kids and stuff like that, then you deal with those issues as well. And as you deal with those issues, then you're creating good EQ. You see, emotional quotient. You won't go around the house yelling and screaming at your kids, because the fact is you're learning to be an effective parent. And a lot of time, to be an effective parent, you have to learn how to communicate. But first of all, you have to deal with anything that was dealt to you. You may have been communicated poorly to when you were little. You may have been verbally abused. So you have to deal with those issues, whether you pray about them or whether you talk to a counselor, whether you write them out on a paper and get them out there and ask your creator to move mightily upon your heart and bring about forgiveness and bring about reassurance. Then you do everything that you need to do to deal with those bitterness and those struggles. And as you deal with that, then you become emotionally whole. You know, if it takes two to tango, no matter if it's a marriage or a relationship or anything, there is not only one person at fault, there's always two. It takes two to tango. There's two sides to everything. So if there's issues there relationally, you have to deal with those. You have to sit, you have to talk about them, you have to get them out in the open, you have to forgive each other. And as you forgive each other, it brings about wholeness there as well. Another thing too is abusive. Like for instance, if you're an alcoholic or somebody dealing with drugs or some other issues like that, that could be taking you down emotionally as well. You have to get help in those areas. And as you get help in those areas, then you're able to walk in emotional wholeness. When you're able to walk in emotional wholeness, then you're able to deal with other people more constructively. You're able to deal with other people more effectively. And as you're able to deal with people more effectively, then you are able to minister out of that overflow bucket. You want to always create an overflow, because then when you do things out of your overflow, that overflow is what blesses others. You're not giving people what's in the bucket, because eventually you become depleted. What you're doing, you're pouring out the excess on them. Freely you've given, you have received, freely you give, and that's what you're doing. The same way you do it academically. You see, you learn, you get into your books, you study, you read, you build your mind, you find out your learning styles. You know, and a simple method that I use whenever I'm tutoring to find out what a student's learning style is ask them what their favorite color is. And they tell me what their favorite color is. And when having told me their favorite color, then I ask them just a simple question, which I request of them to not even think, just tell me, you know, what the first thing that pops into their mind. I say, when I say your favorite color, what can you tell me about it? What can you share? And a lot of times you'll find the ones who are visual learners will always describe something that's visual, you know, and then those who are auditable learners will describe something auditively, you know, and someone who is deep and complex and analytic, you know, they will go into the deep, complex nature of that color. And from that, I'm able to decipher exactly what their learning styles are, how they learn, and I tailor everything to their needs as well. Another thing that I do in realizing and getting people to operate out of their excess is always to get to know them in terms of what their favorite superhero is, especially when I'm dealing with kids. Because then the fact is, I relate everything that I use that superhero in it. If I'm teaching math, I use that superhero in it. If we're reading or we're learning to read, I get reading books with that superhero being the theme. So therefore, there's something there that they like, and then something there that they appreciate, and something there that they could grow from. And it brings them to the point where their self-confidence is increased. And as it increases their self-confidence, then they're able to function out of their overflow. You see, when you increase your self-confidence, you're more stout, you're bold, you're more able and apt to move forward. When you increase your self-confidence, then you're more able to want to share with others. And you see, as you share with others, that's when the overflow comes in. Another thing too, when you think about finances, you know, I learned this principle, you know, it's 10 golden eggs. You never eat number 10. You take the 10th egg and you save it. You put it in a savings account and you leave it there. So every time you have 10 eggs, then you could use up the 9, but always leave back number 10. And that number 10 keeps growing. You take the 9th one, and the 9th one, you invest it and you do all what you want to do with it. Then you take one of them, and then you tithe or you give and you share and you do what you need to do with that one as well. The other 7 is the ones that you use for your bills and everything that you're paying. So then when you learn those principles, what happens is that you have something to grow. A lot of times people wanting to do things out of their excess, but they don't have anything to grow. And you cannot grow and use excess if you don't have something, a seed that's planted that needs to grow. So I want to encourage you as you go out there today, learn to minister and learn to share out of your bucket that's overflowing, or out of your overflowing bucket. And then just pour into as many lives as you can. And have a wonderful growth day. And don't forget, hit the subscribe button below. Hit the subscribe button below. Thank you very much. God bless you.